in.
The President and the House should follow that lead, because shutting down the government over Christmas is a terrible idea.
4 times we promised them that we would build the wall and put it on a spending bill, and now we're saying, oh no, we're going to kick it to February when Pelosi's going to be Speaker. It'll never happen.
The problem is I don't see the Democrats paying any price whatsoever for essentially sanctioning open borders and not adequately funding border security. So it may be a political fight that's going to take us into the 2020 election.
Mr. President, we're going to back you up. If you veto this bill, we'll be there. But more importantly, the American people will be there. They'll be there to support you.
Mike Emanuel's there right now, live on the Hill. Where do things stand at this hour, Mike? Good morning.
Well, Bill, good morning to you. We expect later today House lawmakers will vote on that 6-week government funding extension. It will not contain the $5 billion for the border wall that President Trump has wanted. Bottom line, the Democrats are not playing ball on that issue. President Trump is not giving up hope in terms of getting that border wall. He continues venting on Twitter, saying the Democrats who know steel slats wall are necessary for border security are putting politics over country. What they are just beginning to realize is that I will not sign any of their legislation, including infrastructure, unless it has perfect border security. USA wins. There's a lot of frustration, both sides of the aisle, particularly with Republicans who wanted the Democrats to come along to give them some border security money to help the president tighten up things down at our southern border. Bottom line, Democrats feel like they have leverage. They needed a 60-vote threshold in the Senate, so all they were able to pass was a 6-week government funding extension and send it over to the House, Bill.
We'll see if it gets signed. Thank you, sir. On that, on Kirsten Nielsen now. She's on the House side of the Hill. What are the expectations for a high-profile hearing today, Mike?
Yeah, no doubt about it, Bill. Speaking of the border wall, you've got Kirsten Nielsen, the Secretary of Homeland Security, talking about efforts her department has made to tighten things up at our southern border, more apprehensions at the southern border, sending the U.S. military there to try to help with efforts to try to tighten things up as well. Nielsen is on the hot seat also internally. There's been a lot of speculation about her future, questions about whether she may be leaving the Trump administration. So a lot to watch in that high-profile hearing getting away any moment now on the House side of the Capitol.
We'll be with you all day. Thanks. Mike Emanuel live on the Hill leading this hour. Thank you, Mike.
Another big story to watch this morning. President Trump ordering the Pentagon to pull all U.S. troops out of Syria, saying ISIS has been defeated and there is no longer any reason to be there. Reaction now pouring in from Republican senators, both for and against the move. Listen.
President Trump said, we're going to fight when we have to, but when we win, we're going to come home. It's an incredibly bold maneuver. All of the naysayers in Washington will be against him. But guess what? If you ask the American people, this is why President Trump won the election.
I believe it is a catastrophic mistake that will have grave consequences for the United States, for our interests, and for our allies in the months and years to come.
To those who say we have defeated ISIS in Syria, that is an inaccurate statement. They have been hurt, they have been degraded, and I give the President all the credit in the world for changing our policies regarding the fight against ISIS, but I will not buy into the narrative that they have been defeated in Syria, Iraq.
And the president tweeting this morning. Does the U.S. want to be the policeman of the Middle East, getting nothing but spending precious lives and trillions of dollars protecting others who, in almost all cases, do not appreciate what we are doing? Do we want to be there forever? National security correspondent Jennifer Griffin is live at the Pentagon with more this morning. Hey, Jennifer.
Hi, Julie. Well, a senior U.S. defense official tells me the president made the decision to pull out of Syria after speaking with Turkish President Erdogan last Friday, December 14th. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was there at the time and was the first to be told, we are leaving. The Turkish president told President Trump that Turkish forces were planning to enter Syria soon to go after the Kurdish PKK and warned U.S. troops to get out of the way. This, I am told, hastened the president's decision, something he had been mulling for some time. The president gave the military 30 days to pull out. The fear among U.S. military commanders and Pentagon chiefs is that the U.S. will not be able to protect its Kurdish and Syrian allies. The Syrian Democratic Forces, or SDF, who have fought alongside U.S. forces to defeat ISIS and retake Raqqa, those Kurdish forces and other allies are likely to be slaughtered, I'm told. As one senior U.S. defense official put it to me, no one will ever work or fight with us in the Middle East again as a result of this hasty withdrawal and the abandonment of those Kurds who risked everything to fight with the U.S. against ISIS. Not a single U.S. military commander or leader I've spoken to at the Pentagon agrees with the president's unilateral decision to pull all 2,000 U.S. troops out of Syria, leaving a vacuum that Iran and ISIS will fill. The decision is being viewed by the military as a Christmas gift to Russian President Vladimir Putin, who just spoke in Moscow during his annual news conference.
As for the Islamic State group defeat, I agree with the President of the United States. I have already spoken about the fact that we have achieved significant changes in the fight against terrorism on this territory and have seriously hit ISIS in Syria.
Most believe the Russians will move into the vacuum created by the U.S. pullout. The Russian embassy in Washington tweeted the following praise for President Trump's decision, quoting the spokesperson for Russia's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Quote, the U.S. decision to pull its troops from Syria creates good prospects for a political solution in that Arab country. Critics point to the pullout of U.S. troops from Iraq in 2011 as giving rise to ISIS. Defense Secretary Mattis and John Bolton convinced the president to keep American troops on the ground in Syria, not only to continue the ISIS fight, but to keep an eye on Iranian forces in Syria. The president's announcement shows he is no longer listening to the generals, Defense Secretary Mattis, or Secretary Pompeo. Julie?
All right, Jennifer Griffin, thank you.
Let's get some analysis now. Retired four-star General Jack Keane, chairman of the Institute for the Study of War and a Fox News senior strategic analyst. General, how you doing? An early Merry Christmas to you. I take it you don't like this move. How come?
Well, you and our viewers know, I think, that I've agreed with most all of President Trump's foreign policy and national security decisions, and I have great respect for the national security team that provides him advice. All that said, this is a huge strategic mistake that I hope the president is willing to reconsider. And if he does not, I believe with some degree of confidence that he'll come to regret this decision. I mean, clearly, we're repeating the Obama mistake of premature withdrawal, which got us ISIS. It is a misstatement to say that ISIS is defeated in Syria. What is accurate is we have destroyed their safe haven in Raqqa, and we have now taken down a town of Hajin, which ISIS put up a fight for over 2 months, which demonstrates their determination and resilience. And there's remnants of ISIS still in the area. In my judgment, we need to stick to it and finish the job. When Senator Paul and other supporters of the president's decision say that the United States has got to stop doing the heavy lifting in the Middle East, we've got to leave the fight to the people in the Middle East, that is exactly what we have been doing. The primary fighters are Syrians, Kurds, and Arabs, day in, day out, fighting as light infantry on the ground, engaging obviously the ISIS fighting forces for a better part of a year now. What we have there are advisors, 2,200, who are helping put together the plans to conduct that fight, and also are coordinating air power and artillery support. And that has been decisive.
To be clear on this, what the White House has said, they're not declaring victory on ISIS. They're very deliberate in their language about a territorial victory over the caliphate. If you consider 1 or 2% of the territory between Iraq and Syria is now ruled by ISIS. To that, what would you say, General?
Well, I agree with that. But it's not idle speculation that ISIS has the capacity to rebuild, because they are a very resilient organization, and then reemerge to retake territory again. My sources in the intelligence services have forecasted that event. And then we'll have a decision to make. What are we going to do? Do we go back in there? There'll be considerably less political support for that. It's much easier to leave than it is to go back.
Right.
The second thing that is really crucial to understand here, Bill, by pulling out of eastern Syria, we have given all of Syria to the Iranians. Syria is and will become their strategic anchor in the Middle East. They will have achieved their #1 strategic goal to have established a Shia crescent from Iran through Iraq, through Syria, to Lebanon, to the Mediterranean. That will be a victory of strategic proportions that will have huge consequences for years to come.
You hit the nail on the head there, because this is about Iran and Iran's, assisting Syria in carrying out these atrocities to its own people. The president defending his decision on Syria on Twitter today, writing this: getting out of Syria was no surprise. I've been campaigning on it for years, and 6 months ago, when I very publicly wanted to do it, I agreed to stay longer. Russia, Iran, Syria, and others are the local enemy of ISIS. We were doing their work. Time to come home and rebuild. #MAGA. When the president says that we're not responsible for solving all the world's problems. However, when Assad went ahead and gassed his own people, we went and dropped bombs. I mean, we dropped rockets on them. So the president, while he doesn't want to solve all the world's problems, did get involved when Assad had carried out those atrocities. What happens if we step back? Look at what happened to Iraq. Iraq fell apart. What happens in Syria to the people of Syria, specifically because we won't be there to defend them?
Well, the consequences are very significant, because we said, as part of our strategy in Syria, not only did we want to contain Iran, that we wanted Iran to leave Syria, and we intended to work toward that end. By having a piece of ground in eastern Syria that we were able to drive ISIS out of and to stay the course there, what that gave us is a seat at the political table to get a political solution in Geneva. We just forfeited that. We have turned over the political solution in Syria to the Iranians and to the Russians, because we no longer will have that influence, given we're pulling up and walking out the door, much to the frustration of our allies in the region and also, obviously, in Syria. I do accept the president's concern about our allies not doing enough. They clearly could do more.
When you talk about a modest troop investment, just need a quick answer on this. You mentioned 2,200 troops there now. What is considered modest? Is it 2,200? Is it half of that? What's the number?
No, modest is the 2,200.
So keep them on.
We've got the right-sized advisors there to help that Syrian Democratic Force in what has been one successful battle after another against ISIS.
Thank you, sir, very much for your analysis on that. General Jack Keane, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, good talking to you guys.
You bet. We got some breaking news here in New York on the Harvey Weinstein matter. He was in court in the last 30 minutes now. A pretrial hearing has now been scheduled for March 7th. Weinstein and his attorney came to order on behalf of the detectives in the case and the NYPD to get the judge to dismiss the charges against him. They make allegations of malfeasance. Some of that has actually been successful thus far in this trial for Weinstein's defense, but apparently the request to dismiss the trial was not successful, so they'll move forward after the new year in about 3 months from now.
Yeah, not a surprise
from,
there.
Lower Manhattan.
But nonetheless, a development. All right, a federal judge blocking the latest efforts to limit asylum. How this could impact the Trump administration's immigration efforts.
Also, Vogue magazine, the latest media outlet to go after the first couple. Have you heard about this article? Did you see the comments? Our A-team is going to take it on, and we'll ask the question whether or not it's a little over the top. Come on back next.
Sometimes it's tough because you could see that media wants to bash and focus on negativity.
The acting AG right now, we're told that he has met with ethics officials and has been cleared. They've told him he's fine to oversee the Mueller matter as it relates to Russia, so there was some question about that. But apparently, He's been given the green light. How that affects William Barr and his nomination going forward, we do not know. But for the moment, I want to pass that along to you. Matt Whitaker has been given the A-OK, 18 past the hour. Julie.
All right, the Senate approving a short-term spending bill with no new funds for a border wall, sending it right to the House, where it is likely to pass, averting a government shutdown. But the House Freedom Caucus is spoiling for a fight, calling on President Trump to veto the bill. Let's bring in our A-team. Jessica Tarlov, a Fox News contributor, James Freeman from the Wall Street Journal, also a Fox News contributor, and Morgan Ortagus, a former financial intelligence analyst for the Treasury Department. All right, Jessica, I'll start with you. First of all, a lot of Republicans are upset by this because the president had been steadfast. I will shut down the government until I get the funding to build this border wall. And now, less than a week later, he has changed his tune.
Well, we were talking about this just last week, Bill, when Sandra was here, that Chuck and Nancy were the ones who won that little brouhaha in the Oval last week, which was televised. And
depends on your view of that.
Well, it doesn't, because the president said, I will shut down the government if I don't get my $5 billion for the wall. And it looks like he is not getting his money, and he is not going to shut down the government over it. You've seen a lot of his biggest supporters extremely upset. Ann Coulter, for instance, who I see he's unfollowed on Twitter now.
Oh, he has.
Apparently.
Well, this has been her big sticking point.
Well, this is why,
she wants
and
the wall.
lots of his supporters as well. She wasn't alone in this. So I think it is a big failure on his part, at least in speaking to his base about this. I don't think moderate Republicans care that much, but it's the red meat stuff.
Here's what I think. Listen to Mark Meadows from 2 hours ago. He was on Fox and Friends. He said this is a big fumble. Stand up and veto it if you have to. Is it a fumble in the short term, or do you find a creative way for accounting to figure out how you make it happen ultimately?
Well, it's funny. You're talking about creative ways. Part of it is rhetoric, right? The Democrats have to tell their base we're not giving Trump his wall. So you notice Chuck Schumer in the Senate is saying we'll do security, we'll do enhancements. Of course, there's a lot of fencing there now. So maybe if the bill just doesn't have the word wall in it, he can get the wall. But in all seriousness,
Trump didn't take it anyway. He offered $1.6 billion, and Trump said no.
James, your point is well taken. If you don't spell out the word wall,
but I think
probably still get it.
Ultimately, we would hope there's a deal where you get a very strong fence, maybe you call it a wall, and in return, more legal immigration.
Build the strong fence just doesn't have the same quite ring to it as build the wall. I think that this is an epic failure by Republican congressional leadership, right? The president's been in office almost 2 years, and they've had the chance to get this wall funded, and they punted doing so during the regular order this year. Remember, in August, the Senate canceled their recess because they were going to take care of all of the spending needs, supposedly. They got about 75% done. They were worried about the political optics of a fight over a wall before the November midterms, so they convinced the president.
I think you're exactly right.
And guess what? They still lost the House anyway.
Why do you think there was such a distaste for getting it done?
That's a good question. Why is there, a distaste for, 8 years of saying we're going to repeal and replace, and here we are 2 years into a Republican administration. We didn't get that done either. We don't yet have a Republican plan that I know of, other than the Graham Cassidy bill that was put forth sort of in the 11th hour during the last Obamacare repeal and replace. And so I think Republicans have every right to be upset with congressional leadership, and, quite frankly, with the president and his team. Now, I would say the president, they can try and pivot on this. Maybe they have suggested that they maybe could have the military build the wall. I'm not exactly sure they're going to do that with the DOD budget, because
what you're describing here, what she's describing, James, is how the president of the United States is trying to work around a Republican majority in the House, a majority that dissolves in 2 weeks.
Yeah, I think, and I share the sense of, I think, a lot of Republicans that the wall is not their first priority. But I think for both parties, this is kind of telling you how much they want solutions versus fighting. Again, this is a signature promise. He's come back to it again and again. This is leverage. If you wanted to do a deal to get the immigration fixes that the people in that photo, along with the president, say they want, they ought to be able to work this out in return for his wall, whether or not they want to call it a wall.
What we're driving at here, just to stay on this side of the table for a moment, many people talk about how the left despised this president. Do some on the right show their cards as well with their level behind closed doors about how they feel about him and some of his big proposals that have gone nowhere?
The Republican base is frustrated because for so many years they have voted people into power, into office, who have made a lot of series of promises. I would agree with James that for the things that I care about, the wall is not, even in my top 10, but it doesn't really matter, right? Because the wall is symbolic for, does this administration and do the Congress actually stand by and stick by the things that they say they're going to do?
Right.
And Republican base is frustrated that they are promised things consistently, they vote people into office, they spend money, and then it doesn't necessarily materialize. Now, to be fair, this administration has had a lot of wins, but they're going to have to come out very quickly and pivot and explain how they're going to get this wall done whenever they have an incredibly hostile Democratic House that's about to take over.
I mean, wouldn't Democrats like to see this as perhaps the president is going to be willing to negotiate with them and maybe turn this into a positive where they can negotiate on something? The president is making a huge step here, angering even his own base in the process of potentially coming up with some sort of bipartisan immigration reform solution.
I would love that. I mean, this is the week where we got bipartisan criminal justice reform. That certainly should feel good to
Absolutely.
all of us who are supportive of that it is possible that we can work together. Opioids, that's another area of compromise that we can do. I think that the harsh reality is that congressional Republican leadership looked at the polling on what goes on here. First of all, how people feel about the wall overall. Like you're saying, it's not even your top 10. But for a lot of Republicans, maybe it's 5th or 6th. But they're actually mostly concerned with health care, which is really what both parties have to move on. Number one issue in the election.
Quickly from, didn't mean to cut you off. I'm going to squeeze in Jim Jordan. We'll talk about asylum here. Jim Jordan from last night on his level of frustration on the House floor. Watch here.
You've got to be kidding me. Really? I mean, February 8th, when Nancy Pelosi is speaker, do we really... we're supposed to believe that we're then going to build the border security wall and keep our promise from the 2016 campaign?
Well, he's not wrong, is he? I think we can conclude that from this conversation.
Yeah, I would just add one thing they're not talking about here, they ought to be, is spending restraint. This is, after all, about the amount the government is going to spend. It's north of $4.1 trillion, so... That's what, if it's 2 more months that they're arguing about this, maybe that'll come into it at some point.
Morgan, quickly on this other topic, a federal judge yesterday took the step of ordering asylum seekers who sued after they deportation to be returned to the U.S. to have their claims heard. Where does that go, and what is your reading on that?
Yeah, the administration is going to repeal this. What you're going to continue to see is, unless we have bipartisan compromise on things like immigration and things like health care, as Jessica brought up, you're going to continue to see immigration litigated in the courts, and I don't think that is successful for anybody. I mean, it certainly happened under the Obama administration when he took unilateral executive order action, and I think you're going to continue to see this administration have to fight it out in court.
Okay,
the best solution would be a bipartisan compromise where 2 sides come together and make legislation that's not constantly challenged in the courts.
We might get more news on this today, by the way, so stand by on that.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to this. What the Trump administration did was to change a longstanding policy that you could seek asylum if you were fleeing even from a person or persons who were physically abusive, gang violence, etc. And what they changed is to make it so that it had to be government abuse, which is much harder to prove. So you had a lot of women, this particularly affects women who are coming to this country because they live in abusive households. They're under attack all the time, bringing their kids here for a better life and for safety. It will be litigated in the courts. This is up to Congress. They are the ones that actually change the immigration laws. And I think that congressional Democrats can lead on this.
I think this is a
moving
target. Let's see where it goes. Thanks. Stand by. Come on back in a couple minutes. Loretta Lynch was on the Hill yesterday at 7, 8 hours. Former AG closed-door hearing as lawmakers are looking into how she handled the Hillary Clinton email matter, Russian interference. So what did they ultimately learn?
We are going to find out. Plus, a memo written by President Trump's pick for Attorney General raising questions about how he would oversee the special counsel's investigation. We got a lot of breaking news on this. We're going to bring it to you next.
This is an individual who was writing as a private citizen. He's entitled to his opinion. He wasn't speaking for the government. He wasn't whispering in the president's ear. He was expressing his own opinion on a matter of legal concern.
He can have an opinion that happens to be right. The fact is, it was fatally flawed. The reality is that what we're learning is that there is a weak and unjustified case to prosecute the president for obstruction for firing Comey.
Darrell Issa, last hour here, Republican from California, after a memo written by President Trump's pick for the Attorney General, William Barr, called into question part of Robert Mueller's investigation. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Harris live in D.C. with more on that today. Catherine, good morning.
Well, thank you, Bill, and good morning. We're at the Justice Department at this hour. We're just a few minutes away from a news conference about an indictment against some Chinese hackers, but we're hoping to get some questions in to the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein. In the meantime, there are major headlines coming out of the Justice Department this morning. One of our contacts has confirmed that the acting Attorney General, Matt Whitaker, has met with Justice Department's ethics officials, and they have told him that he is fine to oversee the Robert Mueller investigation. This is significant because there has been criticism of Whitaker, given his past comments to the media that were highly critical of the probe and talked about diminishing or narrowing the scope of that investigation. In addition, we've been able to obtain this memo, which was provided to the Judiciary Committee for the upcoming confirmation of the President's choice to lead the Justice Department, Bill Barr. And the reason the memo is important is that it was sent to the Deputy Attorney General last summer, unsolicited, and it talks about whether there's a strong legal foundation for any kind of obstruction probe by the Robert Mueller team. And it reads in part, quote, "As I understand it, his theory is premised on a novel and legally insupportable reading of the law. Moreover, in my view, if credited by the department, it would have grave consequences far beyond the immediate confines of this case and would do lasting damage to the presidency and to the administration of law within the executive branch." So we will have an opportunity, hopefully this morning, with our questions to the Deputy Attorney General to respond to both of these issues. Number one, that the acting Attorney General, Matt Whitaker, will have oversight, principal oversight for the Robert Mueller investigation. And second, this idea that if the Mueller investigation is looking at an obstruction case, there is not a sound legal foundation. So we'll want to hear the Deputy Attorney General's view on that as well, Bill.
What happened on the Hill now? Loretta Lynch, 7 hours behind closed doors. What comes of that?
Well, she was behind closed doors for 7 hours yesterday. I'm going to actually duck down because we're just about to begin, Bill. We'll be back with you.
Okay. All right. Catherine Herridge with that from the Department of Justice.
Well, a lot going on.
She's had a very busy week. Thank you, Catherine. Back to you when that news happens.
You would never think that we're about to take a Christmas break, right? It just seems like it's just ramping up again. Let's bring back in the A-team with us, Jessica Tarlov, James Freeman, and Morgan Ortegas. All right, let's first just talk about, the information that we're getting from Catherine Herridge and your reaction.
As it relates to Loretta Lynch, the hearing, I understand, why Democrats are frustrated bringing her back, but this is really the last time that the Republicans are going to try to have.
She's the last interview. She's like the last woman standing.
And it's the last time they're going to have accountability, on this matter. I think, Republicans continue to have frustration about, every step along the way in these investigations last year, how the FBI conducted themselves with Hillary Clinton versus how they've conducted themselves with Donald Trump are just two monumentally different things. Of all the text messages that have been revealed, was there one text message that said something even remotely close about Hillary Clinton, what it said about Donald Trump? And all of the communications where we have found consistent bias against the Trump administration and campaign, is there even one thing that was close to the same sort of bias? Nothing that I found.
Well, we haven't seen everybody's text messages. We know that Peter Strzok was originally a P6 supporter, and we've looked into this over and over again, which is frankly why there were more Democrats that showed up for the Loretta Lynch questioning than Republicans yesterday. Jerry Nadler made that perfectly clear afterwards. Both sides admitted there was no new information that came out of that. They were much more interested in coming for the Comey pile-on and talking to him incessantly about the Hillary Clinton email investigation, which frankly what he did there with the reopening and then shutting of the case within 24 hours is something that had a causal effect on the election outcome. And for people to be arguing, and we've spoken about this many times, Morgan, so I'm not accusing just you of this, that Trump was the one who was hurt by this. There was an open investigation to his campaign that the FBI did not feel the American public needed to know about, but they needed to know about Anthony Weiner's laptop. Hillary Clinton actually in this, having considered the number of investigations that have cleared her, was grossly mistreated by the FBI and by Republicans on the Hill who continue to parade the actors in this kind of false story in front of them over and over again. And don't you? Yeah, it is a false story. What's going on that Loretta Lynch mishandled this or mishandled that, or Jim Comey was the one who hurt Donald Trump. Jim Comey hurt Hillary Clinton.
The reason why the questions came up is because the answer was so elusive, James. That's why this thing continues to go on. Rod Rosenstein's talking right now about penalties for China. Do we want to take this, Department of Justice? Just listen for a quick moment here, and James, I'll come back to you.
Of the department's cases alleging economic espionage over the past 7 years involve China. More than 2/3 of the department's cases involving thefts of trade secrets are connected to China. In the last few months of this year alone, our department has announced charges in 3 separate cases alleging crimes committed at the behest of a branch of the Chinese Ministry of State Security. It is unacceptable that we continue to uncover cybercrime committed by China against America and other nations. In 2015, China promised to stop stealing trade secrets and other confidential business information through computer hacking with the intent of providing competitive advantage to companies in the commercial sector. But the activity alleged in this indictment violates the commitment that China made. That was a commitment they made to members of the international community, to the United States, to the G20, and to APEC.
Those got stolen.
Now, we want China to cease.
So not only is the U.S. making this announcement today, but word from London at the same time, Britain says that will join the allies, meaning the United States and others, in holding the Chinese government responsible for this global hacking campaign. When you think about this and you marry it with the tariff battle, et cetera, the administration's making this case public.
Well, it's interesting. You see a lot of coverage about Donald Trump as being sort of alone in the world, but I think this is one of a number of events that have to make the communist thugs who run China very nervous, is because you have the administration, law enforcement laying out a disturbing long pattern of violations of the rule of law, espionage, cyber hacking, ties to the Chinese government. The Chinese government would love to say, oh, it's Trump. This is some part of a negotiation. And as you said, you have our allies around the world saying, no, this is a China problem. It's not about Trump and his trade policy.
You know, on the campaign trail, he said he would be tough on trade, tough on China. Your reaction?
Well, if anyone who's watched me on Fox knows that I'm, the ultimate China hawk on here. And I think that what this president is doing to move the country and both parties, really the foreign policy establishment, towards a more aggressive stance towards China is the most important thing that I think he will do in these 4 years. And I think, the important thing is it's not just Republicans that he's moved on China. I mean, among the Democrats and the foreign policy establishment that I talked to, there's been a clear reckoning that we have grossly mishandled the relationship, both sides, right? Over the past 20 years, we've had this theory that if we open up economically to China, then they would somehow slowly reform more and become more democratic. That hasn't happened. We're in a complete cyber war with them. They're attacking our companies. They're attacking our government on a daily basis. And we've had our hand in the sand. But collectively, this criticism is bipartisan where I say this. We've had our head in the sand as it relates to cyber hacking, the South China Sea, aggression against our allies in China. So to bring the foreign policy establishment, to bring our allies together to really counter China.
You're both right about the wholesale look that's necessary with this administration, what's happening with China, because there are a lot of things moving on a lot of fronts, including this one, too. Moments ago, word from the Capitol that the Republican press conference has been canceled. Why that is, we don't know, but Caroline McKee on the Hill tells us it may happen later today. The official reason is that the meeting this morning went too long and they're in votes now. However, it's worth noting, Caroline points out Republicans control the floor. We'll get updates as we hear this. I would just keep in mind what Mark Meadows said 2 hours ago. He said you cannot fumble at this point over border security. And he urged the president, he said, if you want to go ahead and veto this budget, we'll have your back. Do we think that some of that is in play now?
Yeah, of course, we've got to speculate on why they're canceling, but I think this is the good point here, which is the president has not signed off on this deal. We're talking about what people don't like about it, what they're criticizing. He may say no, and if you look at recent history, shutdowns don't actually do that much political damage over the long term. So he may be thinking, now's the time. I'm gonna hold out. The essential functions of government, national defense continue, but I'm not going to let the full bureaucracy run and keep the paychecks going while we're having this discussion.
I think it's an interesting development. Let's see where it goes.
Right, and that's 40 votes or so that the Freedom Caucus is right now that he would be lending to the president. But you are completely correct about the long-term implications of a shutdown politically. But in the near term, it always does hurt Republicans, no matter who's responsible for it. The
Except for the Schumer shutdown.
No, but no one talks about that and no one calls it that but Republicans.
Sorry, just to be clear, this is what Mark Meadows said. If not now, then when? And that's
right. Definitely not next month, so.
Yeah, the numbers don't get easier for him, do they?
Mark, I can't believe I'm saying this, but Mark Meadows is absolutely right. This isn't, it's not even about the wall. It's about the fact, are we going to stand by the things that we commit to our voters, and just giving people, just sort of saying we're going to do X, Y, Z and not doing it. Our base is so over that, and they should be, and the country should be.
But the president has said that he will inadvertently get Mexico to pay for it. So, I mean, that's something that
there's also a GoFundMe page that's raised $1.4 million from it.
I think it's up to 1.7 or something. Since we've been sitting
congratulations. I look forward to seeing that piece of fence. But the president even walked it back the other night on Twitter when he said, I didn't mean a hard wall. It could be concrete slats, or using architectural terms here. He's really trying here. But I believe his base, that 2025 that's sticking will always stick. But that top 10% there.
I don't know about that.
We got to roll. James, thank you. Jeff, it's good to see you. Morgan, thanks. Have a good holiday. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Whatever applies, okay?
All right. They're actually coming back because we're going to dive into one other thing.
We're never leaving.
Stay there.
I got you. All eyes on the market now. What's doing on Wall Street, the wake of the Fed rate from yesterday, the hike up a quarter point. We'll talk about the investor response coming up in a moment right here when we come back. Couple things here. We're just trying to put the pieces together. Keep in mind this bill has not been signed. The showdown for the government could happen tomorrow night, Friday night at midnight, into Saturday morning or not. Chad Burgum says things are getting squirrely on the spending bill. That's Chad's word a moment ago. There was a press conference scheduled. It was canceled. Why it was canceled, we do not know. But the president shot out this tweet 18 minutes ago. While I begrudgingly signed the omnibus bill, I was promised the wall and border security by leadership would be done by the end of the year, in parentheses now. It did not happen. We foolishly fight for border security for other countries, but not for our beloved USA. Not good is the end of the tweet there. So we'll try and read between the lines here and figure out what's happening, behind closed doors. So we'll get back to that in a moment and tell you what we think we know. In the meantime, back with the panel here. This is a special surprise, Christmas surprise, part 3.
We're going to sleep here.
So, we had the beautiful picture of the first couple in the cross room of the cross hall of the White House. And Vogue came out with a rather scathing review of this photo. Do we have it? Thank you, guys. Called it surreal quality, called it a cardboard cutout version, said they are, quote, very, very smiley. They're also holding hands, a move that's famously out of character for them. Why it feels so strangely off. Wax statues with a question mark. That's Vogue magazine.
Don't go to Freeman first on this.
Ladies?
No, I do have an opinion. If you... Sorry, go ahead.
No, I want to hear what you have to say.
If you think that's nasty and mean-spirited, you should try Teen Vogue, which has become the vehicle for trying to teach young people how to be progressive, leftist, radicals.
I mean, maybe the picture's too perfect. Is that what the problem is?
Because I think it looks beautiful.
It is gorgeous. I mean, I want that to be my Christmas picture.
When I saw her,
and I want the dress. I mean, holy cow, she looks
took
amazing.
my breath away. I mean, she is like one of the most beautiful human beings on the planet. And how anyone can be nasty to her.
Here's the problem.
It's just because they're jealous. I'm jealous.
Those on the left
She's
can't
amazing.
find a way to say anything good about this White House, Jessica. This is petty.
Oh, I think that is petty, but what I think Vogue should have done, and I agree, that dress, I mean, all of it looking great, but I think it is important, especially when left publications and leftists like myself are attacked for having nothing good to say, especially about Melania, that you focus on the issues here. I mean, Melania with her Be Best campaign, which is about cyberbullying when we know her husband's an aficionado. Melania, whose family has benefited from chain migration.
We're talking about the photo and how
no, we're not. It's more than the photo. No, but it is about the photo because that is the issue here because it allows the right to say, oh, you just can't say anything good about her.
I know, but
take her down on policy, and it can be done.
Right, but
it's not.
But she is bashed more than any first lady has ever been bashed.
I mean, there have been people. Hillary Clinton.
Would they do? Sorry,
Hillary Clinton.
They would never ever even consider this for the Obamas over 8 years. James, quickly. We can't call on the guy.
The Trump cyberbully thing. I mean, when he's picking on typically the some of the most powerful people in the world. If he says crying Chuck Schumer on Twitter, are we really upset about this?
Okay. All right, guys. Well, you know what? I thought we would find agreement on one topic before the holiday.
I agree it looks beautiful, right?
Well, his half is less good than
Thank
her
you, Jessica.
Merry
Thank
Christmas.
you, James. Thank you, Morgan.
All right. The Dow looking to gain traction this morning after the Fed's interest rate hike sent stocks into a free fall. We'll take a closer look at how stocks are responding this morning. Stay right there.
Made a move down again today. Seeing how they're doing is Jerry Willis from Fox Business. What are you hearing down there, Jerry? Good morning.
Good morning. You know, it's been intense down here for the last couple of days. As you know, yesterday was really a coal in your stocking kind of day. We're used to a Santa rally at this time of year, right? That's not what's been happening. The Dow, the S&P, the NASDAQ on pace for their worst year since 2018. Think about that. That was at the time of the financial crisis, right? So what are we looking at today? Well, the Dow is already down 160 points, the S&P down 10, the NASDAQ negative as well. All three major averages off here. We're getting a steady drip, drip, drip of negative news. The Philadelphia Fed index, that's an obscure manufacturing index, pointing negative here. So people didn't like that. Lots of folks here saying they expect stocks to continue lower today. But I got to tell you, you never know. Normally what happens